It was a humid Friday night in Los Angeles. The kind of night where the city hums like an amplifier just before a guitar solo. The crowd outside the Viper Room was electric. Leather jackets, torn jeans, eyeliner sharp enough to cut through the neon. Among them stood a man in a worn fedora, scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. He didn't look like a celebrity. He didn't even look like he belonged. Just another aging rocker, maybe homeless, maybe high. The security barely glanced at him when he shuffled through the back entrance with a paper ticket in hand. No entourage, no flash, just Johnny Depp. He hadn't planned on being seen. That's how he liked it these days. No red carpet, no press. Just raw, unfiltered music. His soul had been heavy for months, and tonight, he just wanted to feel again. Inside, the air pulsed with bass as an up-and-coming rock band shredded through their set. The crowd pushed toward the stage, phones raised, all eyes locked on the performers. Except for one guy, a younger man, drunk, loud, entitled. He turned around and bumped into Johnny, spilling part of his drink on Depp's worn jacket. "Watch it, old man," the guy snapped, looking Johnny up and down. "What are you even doing here?" Johnny smiled gently. "Same as you. Listening." But the drunk guy wasn't done. He laughed and shouted at his friends, "Hey, get a load of this hobo. Thinks he's still a rock star." The group laughed. A few phones came out. People turned. Eyes narrowed. And still, Johnny said nothing. He just stood there, quiet, still, almost sad. No one recognized him. Not yet. But by the end of the night, the entire room would know his name. And they'd regret ever doubting the man in the hat. The guy's laughter cut through the music like broken glass. His friends joined in, mocking Johnny's clothes, his quiet presence, the way he stood with his hands in his pockets like a ghost from another decade. "Bro, you lost or something?" One of them sneered. "There's a shelter 2 blocks down. This place ain't it." Johnny didn't flinch. He looked at them calmly, almost with curiosity, like he was watching a bad scene in a movie he'd already seen 100 times. He could have said something. He could have embarrassed them. But he didn't. He just turned back toward the stage, absorbing the music with a quiet reverence only real artists carry. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. But the loud guy wasn't done. He shoved Johnny slightly. Not hard, but enough to draw attention. "Don't ignore me, man. You hear me?" That was when a security guard approached. Young. New. Didn't recognize Depp either. "Is there a problem, sir?" The drunk one grinned. "Yeah, this dude's creeping people out. Smells like dust and whiskey." Johnny raised his hands. "No trouble. Just here for the music." Security glanced at the group, then back at Johnny. "I'm gonna have to ask you to move toward the back, sir." A few people nearby watched, phones angled subtly in his direction. No one said anything. The spotlight of judgment was on him now, and no one knew who they were judging. Johnny sighed and stepped back, further into the shadows. He hadn't come to be seen, but somehow that made them see him even less. And in that moment, no one realized they were pushing out a man who had once owned that very stage. Johnny found himself near the back wall now, the music a little muffled, the air cooler. He leaned against the painted brick and took in a slow breath. For a moment, he considered leaving. The night hadn't gone the way he'd imagined. He'd come to feel alive again, to be anonymous, yes, but not invisible, not unwanted. The truth was, he missed this world. Not the fame, not the headlines, the rawness, the music, the unspoken electricity that happened when guitars screamed and strangers became family for a few hours. He hadn't felt that in years. But instead of connection, he found ridicule. All because he hadn't worn designer boots or arrived with a flashbulb escort. He wasn't a character tonight. No eyeliner, no cameras, just himself, weathered, quiet, and human. And that, somehow, had made him a target. He rubbed his hands together, eyes scanning the crowd. No one recognized him. Not really. A few people glanced his way and looked away, disinterested. But then he noticed her. A girl, maybe 19, maybe 20, sitting on a worn leather couch near the back, holding a sketch pad on her knees. While everyone else stared at the stage or their screens, she was drawing. Fast, intent. Her pencil scratched quickly, and every now and then, she looked up at him. Their eyes met. She blinked, hesitated, then smiled, shy, like she knew a secret she wasn't sure she should say out loud. Johnny tilted his head, just enough to acknowledge her. And then, The loud guy returned. "Thought we got rid of you, Grandpa," he barked, now emboldened by the security guard's earlier dismissal. His voice cut through the song's breakdown. "Still lurking like a creep?" The band's frontman glanced up from the stage, slightly distracted. A few heads turned. Someone else laughed. The moment was spiraling again. The sketch girl stood up. She stepped between Johnny and the drunk guy, not aggressively, but deliberately. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. The guy scoffed. "Yeah, some washed-up bum with a fedora problem." She didn't flinch. She held up her sketchbook, and there he was. A stunning pencil portrait of Johnny Depp, down to the shadows under his eyes. "This bum is Johnny Depp." A hush rippled around them, and for the first time that night, silence worked in Johnny's favor. For a few long seconds, the club fell quiet in the strangest way. Not silent, just confused. The band's riff stumbled, the vocals trailed off, and even the bartender paused mid-pour. Johnny didn't move. He stood there, eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat, watching it all unfold. Not with ego, not with smugness, but with a tired familiarity. He'd seen this moment before. The split second when people realized the man they mocked wasn't invisible. He was just unpackaged. The drunk guy's face twisted into disbelief. "You're kidding, right? That's not Johnny Depp." The girl with the sketchbook didn't even blink. "It is. I know his face anywhere. You just couldn't see past your own noise." Someone nearby pulled out their phone and started Googling. Another whispered, "Wait, he was in that movie, right? The pirate guy." And then, confirmation. A young woman scrolled through a photo of Johnny from a few months ago. Same scarf, same fedora, same eyes. Gasps. "Holy, that's really him." Johnny didn't speak. He didn't need to. The energy shifted fast. A ripple turned into a wave, and suddenly everyone wanted to be near him. The crowd that had ignored him, or worse, mocked him, was now swarming with curiosity, awe, and just enough guilt to taste. "Mr. Depp, Johnny, sorry about earlier. Can we get a picture? Didn't recognize you, man. My bad." He raised a hand gently. "It's all right," he said softly. "I came here for the music, not the spotlight." But his voice was hoarse, more worn than they remembered from the movies. There was weight in his words, and pain. The girl with the sketchbook looked at him carefully. "They didn't deserve to know who you were." He met her eyes. "Sometimes it's better that way." Then the band did something no one expected. They stopped the show mid-set, and the lead guitarist leaned toward the mic. "We just found out Johnny Depp is in the house," he said, half laughing in disbelief. "That's a damn honor. Sir, would you do us the privilege of coming up here?" The crowd roared. Phones lit up. Johnny looked at the stage, then back at the crowd, and hesitated. For a man who once stood before millions, the spotlight had never felt heavier. Johnny didn't move at first. The invitation hung in the air like smoke. Loud cheers, flashing phones, hopeful faces. But inside him, something was trembling. He hadn't touched a stage like this in over a year. Not since the media storm. Not since the courtrooms, the tabloids, the gut-wrenching betrayal that turned his private world into public entertainment. That version of him, the one with the guitar in his hand and fire in his chest, felt like another lifetime. And yet, here it was again. The stage, the sound, the call. He looked up at the band. The lead singer offered a small, respectful nod. No pressure, no spectacle. Just an artist recognizing another. Then Johnny glanced at the sketch girl. She hadn't moved. Her sketchbook was pressed against her chest like a shield, or maybe a tribute. "It's your call," she said softly. And somehow, that made all the difference. He stepped forward. The crowd parted like waves. Whispers followed him, some reverent, others embarrassed. The loud guy who mocked him earlier was nowhere to be seen now, swallowed by shame or the shadows. The moment Johnny's boot hit the bottom step of the stage, something shifted. Not just in the room, in him. He was no longer the man hiding in a hat. He was the artist again. The band handed him a cherry red Fender, slightly out of tune. He adjusted it with the precision of a man who had lived lifetimes in the studio. His fingers, still nimble despite the years, danced lightly on the strings. He didn't need a mic. He didn't need a speech. He let the music speak first. A slow blues riff, raw, aching beautiful. The crowd went silent. No screaming. No phones. just breath held in reverence. Then, softly, almost like a confession, he began to sing. Not a hit, not a cover, but something of his own, something real. And as the final note rang out, no one moved. Because they weren't looking at a Hollywood actor. They were witnessing a soul they'd nearly forgotten. Johnny Depp, the man behind the myth, returning not for fame, but for healing. As Johnny played the final note, the club seemed frozen in time. Not a single person clapped at first. Not out of disrespect, but because no one wanted to break the silence that had become sacred. Then the applause came. Not loud and wild, but slow, rising, genuine. The kind of applause that says, "We see you now, and we're sorry we didn't before." Johnny stepped back from the mic, his head lowered, the guitar still ringing softly in his hands. For a man so used to applause in films, this hit differently. It wasn't for a character. It was for him. He gave a small nod, then handed the guitar back to the lead guitarist, who shook his hand like he'd just met a legend. Because he had. As Johnny descended from the stage, the crowd gently parted again. This time not from dismissal, but reverence. Some whispered, "Thank you." Others simply placed a hand to their heart as he passed. The girl with the sketchbook was waiting, teary-eyed. "I've never heard anything like that," she whispered. Johnny gave her a half-smile. "It's been a while." But just as he stepped past her, a voice, familiar, almost ghostly, rose from somewhere near the bar. "Johnny." He stopped cold. He knew that voice too well. Turning slowly, he scanned the crowd until he saw her. A woman in her late 40s, eyes wide with disbelief, a drink trembling in her hand. Wavy auburn hair. A silver bracelet he remembered buying in New Orleans. It was Elena. They hadn't spoken in over 10 years. She was the one who got away, or rather, the one he let go when his world became too heavy for two. And now, she was here, at this show, on this night, of all nights. She stepped forward, hesitant. "I didn't even know you were in town. I was just here to see the band." He let out a quiet breath, a flash of history moving behind his eyes. "I wasn't supposed to be here either." The crowd, sensing something personal was unfolding, respectfully turned away, giving them space. Elena looked at him, her voice softer now. "That song, was that about?" Johnny raised a hand gently. "Let's not go there. Not yet." But fate clearly wasn't done with him. Because the past had just walked back into the room, and Johnny wasn't sure if it was here to heal him or haunt him. The crowd faded into background static as Johnny and Elena stood there, face to face, caught in the echo of something long buried. The smell of whiskey, sweat, and old amplifiers hung in the air, but between them was only the silence of unfinished sentences. Elena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to match it to a version frozen in memory. "You look different." Johnny half smiled. "Life will do that to you." A flicker of something passed through her. Regret, maybe, or guilt. "I saw you on the news. Then I stopped watching. Couldn't take it." "I stopped watching too," he said, his voice flat but not unkind. Didn't recognize that guy either. They moved to a quieter corner near the back, where the music felt like a heartbeat and the crowd gave them respectful distance. Johnny leaned against a pillar, arms crossed. Elena held her glass with both hands, steadying the nerves that had returned like old ghosts. "Why'd you disappear?" she asked. "You just vanished. No note, no call." He looked down for a moment. "I thought I was protecting you. From the storm. From me." "I didn't ask for that," she said gently. "I never wanted protection. I wanted the truth." He nodded, almost to himself. "Yeah, I owed you that." Silence. She looked at him with a sad smile. "I always thought the next time I saw you, it'd be in a movie or some charity gala. Not here. Playing blues in a club full of strangers." Johnny shrugged. "This is where I feel human." She reached in her purse, pulled out a crumpled napkin. On it, a faded scribble, his lyrics, from a song they once wrote together. She kept it all this time. "I never let it go," she whispered. His fingers grazed the edge of the paper. "I didn't either," he said. And for a second, time reversed. Two people once torn apart by fame, pain, and choices suddenly felt like maybe, just maybe, something lost wasn't entirely gone. Johnny held the napkin gently between his fingers, as if afraid it might crumble into dust. The ink had faded, but the emotion hadn't. Those lyrics were written in a hotel room at 2 a.m., back when they believed music could fix anything. Back when love felt simple. Elena looked like she was about to speak when a sudden shout erupted from near the bar. A scuffle, loud voices, then a crash, a glass shattering. Johnny's body tensed instinctively. For a man who'd been dragged through every kind of chaos, he could feel when a night was about to turn. The drunk guy was back, more aggressive now, his pride wounded, ego bruised by the earlier humiliation. And this time, he wasn't alone. 2 of his buddies flanked him, and all 3 looked like they had something to prove. "Found your fan club, old man," he slurred, pointing toward Johnny. The bartender was already on the phone, likely calling for security, but Johnny could tell this would escalate before anyone official stepped in. Elena moved in front of him instinctively. "Don't," she whispered. "You're not here to fight." But Johnny had learned long ago, sometimes the fight finds you. The drunk guy marched across the floor, bumping into chairs and spilling drinks as people tried to get out of his way. He stopped just a few feet from Johnny and Elena. "You think just cause you played one sad little song, you're some kind of legend?" he barked. "You're washed up. You're nothing." Johnny's eyes were calm, unreadable. "I don't need you to believe in me." "Then why are you even here?" the guy snapped. Johnny looked around, at the crowd, the stage, the girl with the sketchbook, still watching from afar. "I'm here," he said slowly, "because I love music. Because I love this." The drunk guy scoffed. "Save it for TMZ." And then, he threw the first punch. Or tried to. Before the fist could connect, a hand shot out from the side and grabbed his wrist mid-swing. The lead guitarist from the band. "Back off," he growled. "You're done." Security swarmed, and seconds later, grabbing the guy and hauling him out, along with his flailing entourage. The room exhaled in relief. Johnny just stood there, quiet as ever. Elena turned to him, her voice trembling. "You okay?" He nodded. "Used to worse." But deep inside, something stung. Not the punch, the reminder. Even when he tried to disappear, the world still found a way to drag him back into the fire. The club slowly returned to rhythm. The bartender reset shattered glasses. Murmurs resumed like cautious waves, and the band filled the silence with a soft instrumental. Something soulful, understated. No lyrics, just music, as if the room needed to breathe. Johnny sat on a weathered bench near the back, away from the spotlight, his hands resting on his knees. Elena sat beside him, not speaking, just being there. And sometimes, that meant more than words ever could. "Are you sure you're all right?" she asked finally, her voice low, tender. Johnny nodded slowly. "Physically? Yeah, but I keep wondering, what was I thinking coming here?" She tilted her head. "You were trying to feel something again. That's not weakness, Johnny." He exhaled. "No matter how far I step out of the spotlight, the shadows always find me." "You're not in the shadows," she said gently. "You're in the middle of a room, full of people who just watched you bare your soul." He looked around. A few people were still glancing his way, some shyly, some with admiration, some uncertain. The sketch girl gave him a subtle wave, her eyes filled with something that looked like faith. Not the fan kind, the human kind. Johnny's fingers tapped his knee, restlessly. They'll forget this in a week. Another viral moment. Another clip online. Elena turned to him. "Then make it more than that." He looked at her. "Go back up there," she said. "Play one more. Play for yourself this time." He stared toward the stage. The band was winding down their impromptu instrumental. The mic stood there waiting. He hadn't planned on this. But then again, he hadn't planned on anything tonight, except maybe disappearing quietly into the crowd. Instead, he was being pulled back into something he thought he'd lost forever, belonging. Johnny stood up. He walked slowly toward the stage, every eye now on him. Not in judgment, but anticipation. The kind that only comes when you've proven you have something real to say. And this time, he wasn't walking back into the spotlight for anyone else. He was walking in for himself. Johnny stepped onto the stage like a man returning to the ruins of a city he once built. Every footstep echoed more in his chest than through the floorboards. The crowd had gone silent again, but it was no longer the silence of confusion or dismissal. It was reverence. He took the guitar handed to him, an older Telecaster with faded edges and stories in its strings. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone now carried weight. He strummed a soft, haunting chord. Minor, broken but beautiful. Then another. Then the room dissolved, and it was just him and the music. He began to play, not with the technical flash of youth, but with the rawness of a man who had lived. The melody told stories that words never could, of loss, of longing, of regret, of resilience. It wept and soared and breathed. Then he sang. The lyrics weren't rehearsed. They poured from him like they'd been waiting at the edge of his soul, trapped for years, afraid no one wanted to hear them. I walked through fire in velvet shoes, spoke in silence, paid my dues, loved and burned, then loved again. But the mirror won't lie to broken men. The room held its breath. People weren't recording now. They were watching, listening, connecting. Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, eyes glassy, hand on her chest. The sketch girl was still drawing. Her pencil couldn't keep up. And near the exit, someone else was watching. A tall man in a charcoal jacket and dark sunglasses, arms folded. He'd arrived late, unnoticed. But now, his eyes were locked on Johnny, unmoving. He knew that voice. He knew that pain. And he hadn't seen Johnny in over 20 years. As the final note hung in the air, Johnny looked out over the crowd, really looked. And for the first time in a long while, he saw acceptance. Not as a movie star, not as a scandal, but as a man. And somewhere in that crowd, the past was stirring once again. The last note lingered like a whisper caught in the smoky air. The crowd erupted in applause, but Johnny barely heard it. His gaze was locked on the man standing near the exit, the one who hadn't moved since the song began. Tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that held a mix of recognition and something darker, resentment perhaps. The kind of man you cross paths with once, and he never quite lets you go. It was Mark, an old friend and once a bandmate, a brother in arms during the wild days before fame, before the world tore them apart. Their falling out had been messy, public, and personal. Years of silence now filled the space between them like a canyon. Mark stepped forward slowly, drawing curious looks. His voice was low but clear. Johnny. Johnny turned fully, the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. Mark. Neither smiled. Neither stepped back. Didn't expect to see you here, Mark said, scanning the crowd. Or like this. Johnny's jaw tightened. You mean with no cameras? No scripts? Just music? Mark shrugged. Maybe I'm the one who's changed. Or maybe you just never showed us who you really were. The tension thickened. The crowd sensed it. Two old souls circling, measuring wounds that hadn't healed. Elena approached quietly, her voice soft but firm. Maybe tonight's about new beginnings, not old battles. Mark's eyes flicked to her, then back to Johnny. For a moment, something passed between the two men, a silent truce or a challenge. Johnny wasn't sure, but one thing was clear, the night wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because sometimes the past shows up uninvited. And sometimes you have to decide, fight, forgive, or walk away. The last note hung in the air like a fragile thread, fading into the smoky haze of the club. The crowd burst into applause, but Johnny's focus wasn't on the cheers. His eyes were locked on the figure standing near the exit, almost like a shadow in the dim light. Mark, a man whose face was carved deep into Johnny's past. Once his closest friend, his bandmate, the brother who shared his dreams and demons. Now, a ghost who carried wounds neither had fully healed. Mark's jaw was tight, eyes cold but flickering with something else. Regret? Resentment? Johnny couldn't tell. The years between them stretched like a canyon, filled with silence louder than any scream. Their falling out wasn't just personal. It was brutal, public, and messy, fractured by betrayal, jealousy, and a lifetime of what-ifs. Mark finally spoke, his voice low but steady, cutting through the thick air. Johnny. The single word held decades of history. Johnny turned slowly, muscles tense, heart thudding not with fear, but a storm of emotions. Anger, nostalgia, pain. Mark, he replied evenly, eyes narrowing. The crowd around them quieted, sensing the charged energy, a tension that wasn't just about two men, but the ghosts they carried. I didn't expect to see you here, Mark said, glancing around the club. Not like this. No red carpet. No flashing lights. Just you. Johnny's voice was calm but firm. This is who I've been. The part the world never saw. Not the headlines, not the scandal. Mark's eyes softened for a split second, but then hardened again. Maybe I'm the one who changed. Or maybe you were always hiding behind a mask. Johnny shook his head slowly. I wasn't hiding. I was trying to survive. Their eyes locked. Two men who knew the cost of fame, the cost of silence. Elena stepped in, her voice a soothing balm in the thick tension. Maybe tonight isn't about old grudges, she said quietly, looking at them both. Maybe it's about healing, moving forward. Mark looked at her, then back at Johnny. A long pause stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Mark exhaled, lowering his shoulders slightly. Maybe you're right. Johnny didn't smile. Not yet. But the icy wall between them had cracked. The night was far from over. And somewhere deep inside, Johnny knew this encounter was more than coincidence. It was a reckoning. The club's energy shifted again, charged, unpredictable. Johnny and Mark stood face to face, the years between them suddenly feeling impossibly short and impossibly long at once. Around them, the crowd hushed, sensing something profound unfolding beyond the music and lights. Johnny's mind flashed back to their early days. Two dreamers in a cramped garage, guitars in hand, promises of fame and brotherhood hanging thick in the air. Late nights spent writing songs, breaking hearts, and daring to believe they were invincible. But time had other plans. The betrayal came slowly, a whispered rumor, a misheard conversation, a partnership fractured by pride and hurt. Mark's departure was sudden, leaving Johnny to face the rising tide of fame and personal demons alone. The fall was brutal. Mark's voice broke into Johnny's thoughts. I heard what happened, he said quietly, his eyes dark with years of regret. The trial, the headlines, the chaos. Johnny swallowed hard. Yeah, the worst kind of spotlight. Mark looked away. I never wanted to end like that. For either of us. Johnny met his gaze again. Neither did I. There was a long pause, heavy with everything they never said. Finally, Mark stepped closer. Maybe we can find a way back. Not to the old days, but to something new. Johnny's breath caught. I don't know if I'm ready for that. But you're not the man you were, Mark insisted. And neither am I. Elena watched silently from nearby, hope flickering in her eyes. Johnny nodded slowly. Maybe tonight isn't just about music. Mark smiled faintly. No, it's about redemption. As the band started warming up for another set, the two men stood in uneasy truce. The past wasn't gone, but maybe, just maybe, they could rewrite the future. The night still held many secrets, and Johnny Depp was ready to face them all. The band's soft tuning filled the gaps between their words, creating an almost sacred pause in the night. Johnny and Mark stood in fragile truce, two wounded souls cautiously reaching for something neither fully understood yet. But then, the atmosphere shifted again. The door at the far end of the club creaked open. Heads turned. A figure stepped inside, tall, confident, carrying an aura that made the room's hum drop by a notch. She moved with purpose, scanning the crowd until her gaze locked on Johnny. It was Vanessa. Johnny's heart skipped. Vanessa Paradis, the woman who had once been his world, the mother of his children, and the one who had quietly slipped away as his life spiraled into chaos. Their separation had been mutual, but painful, marked by love lost and the lingering ache of what could have been. She approached slowly, eyes shimmering with unspoken stories. Johnny swallowed hard, memories crashing through his mind like waves against a rocky shore. Johnny, she said softly, voice steady but layered with emotion. He nodded, unable to find words at first. Vanessa glanced at Mark, then back at Johnny. I heard you were here tonight. I had to see for myself. The crowd around them seemed to fade again, the club's usual noise replaced by a fragile intimacy that felt both familiar and terrifying. Mark took a step back, giving them space. Vanessa's eyes searched Johnny's face. You look different. Not just the music. You seem free. Johnny exhaled. I'm trying. She smiled, a bittersweet curve of lips that held both hope and sorrow. I'm glad, she said. For your sake. For the kids. They talked quietly, voices low enough to keep their past from spilling into the room, but heavy with all that had been lost and might still be found. Meanwhile, the band was ready to start again. The moment was fragile, suspended between what was and what could be. And as Vanessa slipped back into the shadows of the club, Johnny felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Or at least, the possibility of it. But peace in Johnny's world was never simple. Because just as one door opened, another creaked ominously in the dark. The music swelled again, a slow, soulful rhythm that seemed to echo the restless pulse in Johnny's chest. He stood near the bar, watching Vanessa disappear into the crowd, her presence still lingering like a haunting melody. He thought the hardest part was over, the confrontation, the recognition, the unexpected reunion. But in the dim corners of the club, shadows stirred, not just the ghosts of his past, but new troubles taking shape. From the entrance, a whisper spread, a name carried on the breath of someone passing by. "Did you hear? The tabloids caught wind he's here. They're on their way." Johnny's stomach twisted. He hadn't escaped that storm yet. Not really. Mark's voice came low beside him. "We need to move, before the press floods this place." Johnny nodded, suddenly tense. This wasn't just about music or old friends anymore. This was survival. The crowd, sensing the shift, grew uneasy. Phones were pulled from pockets, eyes darting to the doors. Outside, the neon lights buzzed, and shadows deepened. Vanessa appeared again at his side. "They won't leave you alone." Johnny's jaw clenched. "I have to face it sometime. But not tonight." They moved to a back exit, where a side door led to a narrow alley. As Johnny stepped outside, the cool night air hit him like a slap. The city never slept. It was a beast, relentless, unforgiving. He looked back once, catching the glow of the club's sign. The music inside was still playing, life continuing, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. A low rumble of engines echoed down the street. Flashing lights. The paparazzi. Johnny's heart hammered, but his face was calm. He'd been here before. This time, he wasn't running. He was ready to fight. The alleyway exploded with flashing cameras and shouted questions. Paparazzi swarmed like vultures, hungry for a story, a scandal, anything to tear Johnny apart again. "Johnny, over here. Tell us what you're doing at that dive club. Are you hiding from the truth? Did you really lose everything?" Johnny's face was a mask of calm, but inside, a fierce fire burned. He wasn't the broken man they painted in tabloids. He was still fighting, still standing. Vanessa stepped forward, shielding him gently. "Enough," she said, voice steady. "He's not your spectacle." Mark joined her, his presence surprising even Johnny. "You want a story? Here it is. A man who's been through hell and still finds the strength to play music because that's what keeps him human." The crowd of photographers faltered, caught off guard by the unexpected defense. Johnny took a breath, stepping forward, the music of his soul louder than their cameras. "I'm not running from my past. I'm reclaiming my future," he said, voice firm and clear. One photographer sneered. "You think a song can fix a scandal?" Johnny smiled, genuine and tired. "It's not about fixing. It's about living." With that, he turned and walked into the night, the flashing lights fading behind him. For the first time in a long while, Johnny Depp wasn't just a headline. He was a man, whole, flawed, and fighting. The night air was thick with tension as Johnny and his small circle slipped away from the flashing chaos. Vanessa and Mark flanked him quietly, a surprising but comforting presence in the storm. They walked toward a quiet diner nearby, a place where the noise of the world seemed to pause. Inside, the warm light and the smell of coffee wrapped around them like a shield. Johnny sank into a booth, exhaustion finally catching up. For years, he'd been running. From the headlines, the betrayals, even himself. Vanessa slid into the seat opposite him, her eyes soft but fierce. "You're stronger than they think." Mark nodded. "Tonight showed that. People still believe in you. Not the myth, the man." Johnny looked at them both, the weight of their words sinking in. "I want to believe that too." They talked long into the night, plans forming. Not for a comeback staged by PR, but for something real. Music, honesty, connection. A small circle of people who saw him, not as a celebrity, but as a human being. And in that diner, surrounded by neon lights and quiet hope, Johnny felt something rare. A beginning. The morning light crept softly through the diner's windows, painting golden streaks over Johnny's tired face. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something stirring, a quiet determination, fragile but undeniable. Mark and Vanessa had left, but their words echoed in his mind. Not just belief, hope. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the one he always carried. Scribbled lyrics and chords filled the pages, fragments of songs born from pain and memory. He opened it to a blank page and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then with growing force, a melody woven from his struggles, his regrets, and the unexpected moments of grace he'd found tonight. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware that a man once broken was quietly rebuilding. Johnny didn't know where this path would lead. A new album? A tour? Fame reclaimed? He only knew this. Tonight, he'd play one song. For himself. For the first time in a long time, the music wasn't about escape. It was about coming home. Johnny's fingers hovered over the strings of his guitar, the worn wood familiar beneath his touch like an old friend. The dim light of the small recording studio was soft but unwavering, casting long shadows on the walls plastered with posters of legends and faded memories. This was his sanctuary, far from the glare of the public eye, far from the chaos of headlines and judgment. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let his fingers fall into a gentle chord. The notes resonated with a quiet vulnerability that rippled through the room. Each strum was a small victory, a step away from the darkness that had gripped him for so long. A notebook lay open on the table, filled with words born from sleepless nights and quiet desperation. The melody grew, weaving through the lyrics like a thread of hope stitched through ragged fabric. As Johnny sang, his voice cracked, raw and honest. The music was no longer just a profession. It was a lifeline. It told the story of loss, redemption, and the painful beauty of starting over. Outside, the world continued spinning, unaware of the slow rebirth happening behind closed doors. But inside, Johnny felt it, something shifting, a door opening. His phone buzzed suddenly, an unexpected message from a producer who'd once believed in him. It was an offer, a chance to record a new album. No gimmicks, no tabloids, just pure music. Johnny stared at the screen, heart pounding. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt real. He wasn't running anymore. He was coming home. Days blurred into nights as Johnny immersed himself in the studio, crafting songs that felt like confessions and prayers all at once. Each note was a battle won, each lyric a truth finally spoken. The music wasn't just sound anymore. It was his soul on fire, fragile but fierce. But with progress came doubt. The weight of his past, scandals, broken relationships, public whispers, haunted every decision. Was the world ready to forgive? Was he ready to face it? One evening, after a long session, Johnny sat alone on a rooftop overlooking the city lights. The skyline shimmered, beautiful and indifferent. He pulled out his phone, staring at two messages. One from the record label confirming the album deal, the other from a fan who'd watched his last concert and wrote about how much his music saved them. His heart ached with both hope and fear. Suddenly, his phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. He hesitated but answered. A calm, familiar voice whispered on the other end. "Johnny, it's time to face the truth." The line went dead. Johnny's breath caught. The crossroads was here. The past was calling again. But this time, he wouldn't run. The night was heavy with anticipation as Johnny stood backstage, guitar in hand, heart pounding with every beat. This wasn't just another show. This was the moment he had been fighting for, to reclaim himself, his music, and his story. The crowd's roar echoed like a distant storm as the lights dimmed. But inside, Johnny found calm, a quiet strength born from every scar, every failure, every victory. He stepped onto the stage, eyes sweeping over faces illuminated by phone screens and hopeful hearts. He wasn't the man the tabloids painted. He was more. Flawed, broken, but unyielding. The first chord rang out clear and true, a beacon cutting through years of silence. With every note, Johnny bared his soul, raw and honest, and the audience listened, captivated not just by the music but by the man himself. Midway through the set, a figure appeared at the side of the stage, Vanessa, watching with pride and tenderness. Mark was there too, standing among friends who believed. And then, a moment of pure magic. The crowd sang back every word, a wave of unity and healing washing over the room. As the final notes faded, Johnny smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. This was more than a comeback. It was a rebirth. He raised his guitar and whispered into the mic, "Thank you for believing. This is just the beginning." The applause thundered, and Johnny knew, no matter what storms come next, he would face them with music, with courage, and with heart. Thank you for following Johnny's journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. More powerful, real stories are coming your way.